Hi everyone, this is the Hungry Math Professor here, and today I'm going to talk about Invitation to a Beheading by Vladimir Nabokov. Uh, Nabokov lived from 1899 to 1977, a brilliant writer, and Invitation to Beheading was published in Russian in 1935, and then it was translated into English in 1959, interestingly, by his son. And in the foreword to the book, Nabokov mentions that his son was a really good translator. Nabokov seems very happy with the translation to English. He read over it himself and said he only had made some like very minor corrections to the translation that his son did. So he's very happy with the translation, which is nice to know. And this is just a beautiful book. Yeah, it's just so beautifully written, just the sentences themselves. The story is really fun. It's whimsical, it's bizarre. The characters, it feels like you're in Alice in Wonderland sometimes because the characters just start doing funny things that you don't expect, and it makes you laugh because it's kind of so silly, and the character kind of like goes into these different dream states, and sometimes you're not sure if he's dreaming or telling you about his reality and things. So it's a lot of fun. It's quite nonlinear at times. Um, yeah, it's really great, but I think there's some more depth to it too, besides all the great writing and the fun story. Um, there's some more depth to it too. So let me get a little bit more into what goes on here, and there will definitely be spoilers for sure. Um, but let me just say that in the very beginning, he's you see him get sentenced to a beheading, sentenced to death right off the bat in the book, and you don't exactly know why in the beginning, but you know he's being sentenced to death, and he is put in this jail, and you get the sense that it's just like this giant castle of a jail, but he's the only one in the jail, right? So it's already kind of unusual and bizarre in that sense. Um, and but eventually you learn that he's been sentenced to death for a crime called Gnostical turpitude. So what is Gnostical turpitude? Well, this word Gnostic can make you think of two different things. There's the Gnostic tradition, which is like this religious tradition from the first couple centuries. Uh, but there's also this word Gnostic in ancient Greek, which refers to knowledge, but a certain kind of knowledge, like some kind of maybe divinely inspired knowledge or some kind of like personal knowledge, as opposed to like some kind of like academic knowledge. So it's maybe a little bit more of a mystical kind of thing that or something that you gain without being able to explain where the knowledge came from or something like that. Um, and turpitude. So basically, he's been sentenced to death for knowing too much or as the book goes on, it seems like he asks too many questions or he's like being too curious. So somehow he's being sentenced to death for being willing to question things. And you get the sense that the other people around him, the rest of society, is, as people say, it's like a very theatrical society. They just sort of obey the rules or they obey their lines and they do what they're supposed to do to sort of play out the way that the society is supposed to go. But Cincinnatus, the main character, from a very young age, was always sort of willing to question things, and this sort of got him in trouble. And at one point in the book, Cincinnatus talks about being a child and realizing that there was something different about him, something that made other people uneasy and so he learned as a young kid that he had to kind of like hide this a little bit from other people because it could get him in trouble. And so he got good at sort of hiding this. And he talks about how eventually he got like comfortable. He fell in love with this person, and he started getting comfortable, and he kind of let his guard down, and he started just kind of letting his true nature. He let other people sort of see this part of him, and this is what got him in trouble, and eventually, this is what got him sentenced to death. Like the other people around him in the society sort of noticed this and maybe alerted the authorities and or something, and he got arrested and tried and so that's already a bizarre thing, right? Like he's being put to death for asking questions, and throughout the book he asks after he's been, he's put in jail, right in page one, basically. He asked them very reasonable questions. He's like, can I know like when I'm going to be executed? And they think this is crazy. Like they react to him like, why would you ask that question? And it's such a funny thing because as the reader, you're like, well, I don't know. That seems like a reasonable question, right? Like, why are these people so perplexed by these questions? And at times, like the head of the jail um, wants this Cincinnatus to like thank him for various things that like no one would expect to be thanked for, um, and they just expect what feel like very unusual things from Cincinnatus. And Cincinnatus throughout the entire book just wants to know a few simple things, and Cincinnatus wants to he wants to write a book, it seems like, and he's not sure if he has enough time. And anyway, there's lots of layers to this book that I'm not going to be able to explain per se, but certainly at the core of the book seems to be some questions about like again, these existential kind of questions about like what's the meaning of life? How do we face death? How do we make sense of what we should do here on Earth, given that we're going to die? And of course, a lot of the answer, or there's no like clean answers in a book like this, but it does seem to point to creativity as being a good source of strength in this and in this kind of thing, and not being constrained by the world's desire to kind of put you in a box, but being able to um, be fully yourself and express yourself in new ways that some other people may not understand. And I think one point that you get from this is that it's not so much that Cincinnatus wants to condemn these other people for the way they choose to live their life, right? It seems you get the sense that like these other people just want to like enjoy their lives, eat, drink, and be merry, or they just want to like accept the way things are and go through the system the way they are. And you don't get the sense that Cincinnatus wants to like judge them or say they're doing things wrong. If they want to live their life that way, then, go for it. But Cincinnatus just wants the space to live his life the way he wants to without feeling like he's constantly going to be condemned himself just because he goes through life differently. At the very end of the book, he's about to be beheaded by who was this guy that wound up being just his jailmate for a long time, but then eventually he surprises him. Oh, I'm not your jailmate. I'm actually the one that's going to behead you. Uh, and at the very end, he's about to be beheaded, and it's a very open-ended ending where you're not so sure if he actually was beheaded or if he wasn't. But either way, he seems to walk away from this beheading. So he's on the chopping block, literally, and the guy's about to chop his head off. And then the book doesn't is not very clear whether his head gets chopped off or not. But whether it does or not, he walks off anyway, and somehow liberated, born again or let go of something, and he walks off and it says something like he finds other people who are like him to sort of connect with and go forward. And so it's not clear if there's some kind of actual metaphysical immortality being expressed here, or some kind of acceptance of who he is and not worrying about what other people think, or there's various different ways to read it. Did his head get chopped off, but he lived through it anyway? Did it not get chopped off? And by fully questioning the way that society is, he was immune to this beheading, and he could just kind of walk off because he finally decided to completely relinquish himself of their rules, right? In some sense, when other people put rules on us, I mean, up to a point, you have to participate in those rules to some degree. And so there could be an argument that at the very end, he just chooses not to participate at all in the reality of this, and that's what frees him. I don't know. I like an open-ended ending, so I prefer not to say what the ending means, and instead I prefer to give you I prefer to give you like four or five versions of what it could mean. But to finish this video off, let me just say like what this book makes me think about. Because constantly, this the main character is being put to death for asking questions, basically. That's what makes him weird. That's what makes him unusual. That's what makes him ostracized. Growing up in the church myself, and taking Christianity very seriously as a child, and as a teenager, I started asking questions. I started asking questions about Christianity because I wanted to understand. I really wanted to understand my faith. I didn't want to lose my faith. I wanted to understand it. And as a kid, I started asking questions, and I was very like obsessive thinker about these kinds of questions. I still am today. Uh, and so like I thought maybe I can talk to my parents or I can talk to different leaders in the church about uh, some of these things that I was asking. And like for instance, here's a question I was asking. Like Jesus died on the cross for our sins, and Christians love to meditate on that, and they feel a very deep connection that Jesus, the God of the universe, would have taken his time to die on the cross for us. And it is a beautiful thing to think about. I don't want to take away from that sort of very beautiful human emotional experience you can have reflecting on the fact that Jesus died on the cross. But as a teenager, one of the questions that I asked was, if Jesus is fully God, then it's not that hard for him to die on the cross. I mean, he knows what's going to happen. He knows it's going to be okay, right? If I die on the cross, I'm a contingent being. That's a very big deal because there's no salvation per se that I can be assured of, like after this, right? But if Jesus is fully God, then it's just like a blip in time for him, and he knows it's all going to be okay. This is the kind of questions I was asking, and I would ask, my parents or different leaders in the church, and I was very naive as a kid. I would get some really negative reactions, or I would start to see like on people's faces that this was making them uncomfortable. And I remember being a little bit confused. I'm just a teenager. Like, why are my questions affecting these adults in such a negative way? But the way I see it now is that, there's a certain amount of people who don't want to ask certain questions, right? In the church, I was always told that God doesn't mind if you're a doubter, like he's okay with your doubts. What people mean usually by that is like it's okay to doubt whether God's going to provide enough money for you for the month, or these are the kind of doubts that are okay to have. But the kind of doubts that are not okay to have are whether Jesus dying on the cross was a big deal or not, or whether faith is actually a reasonable way to come to knowledge. This was a very important question for me as a teenager into my early 20s, that what led me away from Christianity. It wasn't that I thought Christians were, hypocrites or anything like that, or evolution was so compelling to me or something. What for me, it's more of a epistemological thing that I just don't think faith is a good way to establish an entirety of beliefs around like Christianity or something like that. And for me, um, it makes more sense to keep yourself open, to embrace the gray area and not answer many of these questions. Whereas I think Christianity, in some sense, has to put certain answers on certain questions. Otherwise, it's not Christianity anymore. And I think for a lot of these people in my life, my parents and different youth leaders, and even my peers who were just kind of like happy to accept Christianity as it was, these questions made them uncomfortable. And although they didn't like ostracize me or anything, they were certainly, they were turned off by my questions. They would always tell me, they would say things like, "You're thinking too much. You should stop thinking so much." And I understand why they said that, but at the same time, now that I'm 38, that's not really an option for me. Part of what makes me a good mathematician and someone who's interested in philosophy is that I do think so much, and I am an obsessive thinker about these kinds of problems. It brings a lot of joy to me and interest to think that deeply and obsessively about these kinds of problems. And so, yes, you have to learn how to not apply that to non-helpful things, and I'm still trying to learn that. But my point is just that I think what's going on in Invitation to Beheading is, you can apply it to different sort of political things, totalitarianism and things. Certainly, Nabokov was familiar with that. But I think this book is bigger than that. It's about the human condition. It's about the intellectuals or the artists or the other people's desire to just express themselves and not have to play by the rules that society tells us we have to play by, but also not necessarily be anarchists either, just wanting to be who we are and wanting to express ourselves the way we are and wanting to question things without like without activating people's insecurities to the point where they want to shut us up or quiet our questioning. So to me, that's what this book really spoke to me about and really connected with me about. And I think what's interesting about Nabokov's book is I'm not even sure that that's what he was trying to connect with people about, but I think a great piece of art can connect with many people in different ways. And that's what I find so interesting about, even like a painting, for instance, which has just a lot less explanation than like an entire 200-page book can make me feel a certain way that maybe the artist never would have even thought would make me feel, right? In this case, I think Imitation of Heading, I'm not, I don't think what I'm saying is somehow so off from what I think the book is trying to say. Um, but it speaks to people different ways, and I think that's interesting. I also think it's very possible just to read this book and find it absolutely beautiful for the writing and the story and the whimsy and the part that makes you laugh, at the very at several points in the book. It feels like very serious, and then out of nowhere they like break out into a conga line, the jailer and Cincinnatus, and you're just like, it's just a fun, sort of bizarre thing that makes you laugh. So anyway, I highly recommend you read this book and let me know what you think. And I hope to see you at another video.